You know, here's another case of vanished technology that, you know, that's beautiful in itself and interesting, and that they could have even moved somewhere else, you know, and just used it as a piece of sculpture. It's certainly good, as good or better than a lot of sculpture that is used. My name is Donald Stoltenberg. I'm an artist. I've worked in watercolor, oil painting, printmaking, and actually I started in watercolor, and that's what we're going to work on today. What I'll be doing is working on a half sheet of Arches watercolor paper. And at first what I'll be doing is making a sketch of the subject, and then we will go on to stretching the paper and applying the paints and following the technique that I've developed over a number of years. I'm in here. I love being in here with Kandinsky and Chagall and Feinherr and Moholy-Nagy, but these are most of them are Chicago artists who would give a piece of work to the ID in order to raise money for the school. Well, this is a watercolor of the superstructure of a ship. It's the Arcadia, which was a scientific exploration ship in Canada, and it's kept now as a kind of museum ship in Halifax. And when I was up there, I took some pictures of it, made a few sketches, and what I'm going to do is a sort of composite, but mainly it's based on one of the photographs that I took. And I want to just concentrate on the superstructure of the ship, not the whole hull, but the superstructure, which is the masts, the funnel, ventilators, lifeboats, even some signal flags. So what I've done, I've made a sketch, a pastel sketch here, which more or less lays out what I want to do. And then I've got my watercolor paper on this board, and I squared off the sketch. That is, I divided it into 4 equal portions this way and 4 equal portions that way. Then what I did was I took this measurement here and put it here, and this measurement, put it here, squared those together, and then ran a diagonal up here to this top point, and that made a rectangle which is the same proportion as the original. Then I divided it into the same number of rectangles as the sketch has. And now I'm in the process of more or less transferring the forms in pencil onto the watercolor paper. Center line of the sketch runs right down the middle of, almost the middle of the funnel. So here again, I figure the funnel's going to be like that, and it's about a quarter width from here to here, so I will run the same way. That's about a quarter, and it's a little less on this side, so I know the funnel is roughly going to be like that. There's a cap on the funnel which comes in about like this. Then there is a ventilator top. Now that again comes about to the middle, so I know it'll be something like this. putting a liberal amount of water in the sponge, and I want to make almost a lake. Make sure there's enough water. A lot of the superstructure is painted a kind of golden buff color. Certainly the mast is. That's it. Now what I'll do is put some of this blue in. Alright, now what I'm going to do is let this run a bit. If I want this to wipe that out a little bit, I can do that at this point. Get the whites. Mostly I use for black, I use a mixture of phthalo blue and burnt sienna, which makes a lively dark color rather than being a dead black. I interrupt the whole procedure by letting it dry, and today is a sunny day, so I'm going to put it outside in the sun, and probably within 10 or 15 minutes it will have dried. What I want to do though before it dries thoroughly, because it starts shrinking, is I will staple the edges to the board and then let it dry completely, and that will stretch it really tight. I put a staple every 3 or 4 inches. This board, by the way, is Celotex. It's quite strong, but it holds the staples pretty well. World War II, and so we were fully aware of that. I know my mother did work as a dietitian's aide in the hospital in Grand Rapids, and we bought defense war stamps, and there was a lot of war work being done. There were factories in Grand Rapids, and the Army used one of the hotels for training people, and but for me, the high school years all sort of blended together. We were aware of the war, but we had some rationing, but not very serious. And we also had gas rationing, I remember. But as far as for me, it was, it was a big learning time. I mean, your high school years are, but I think one of the things that happened is that I became more and more aware of art. Even though they weren't good courses in the school, there was the Grand Rapids Art Museum and Grand Rapids Public Library where I worked for a while. And, on my own, I just began to pick up things. And I started doing my own painting. You can feel it's, because the board curves a little bit, there's some space between the board and the paper. And it's just like a drum. It's a matter of adding and subtracting, and if I want to subtract, like for instance, I might want a sharper edge here, then what I do is using a sponge, I will scrub out that area like that, which leaves a sharp edge. Now, one thing you can notice with watercolors, or to watch, you remember how vivid those were when I put them down? You know, once they dry, so you have to overstate, because you know when it dries, it's going to darken and dull. So if you want to make sure it stays bright, you've got to make it brighter than you want it to finish up being. That's good. I like to go back and forth between control and chaos. And you might say the original blending was sort of chaotic. It didn't describe anything very specifically. But now I've sharpened it up quite a bit. But what I want to do now is to loosen it up again. And in ways that very randomly, you know, wash out areas, shapes. Now what I'm doing, you know, is I'm sort of fighting with the actual subject, because I don't want it to get too descriptive. Now sometimes I will sharpen things up with the pencil lines, which immediately structures things. You see the difference. You see what happens? For instance, look at this area. Now, if I do this with it, you see how the form begins to sharpen and pop into shapes. And sometimes I'll take random things like this and develop them into more geometric shapes by this technique. I will try to work on this area to make it more sharp and complicated. I want it to be more intense right here, and then gradually work into quieter areas further out. This, in other words, would be the real one central focal point, but I would also like a few minor ones, but this would be the major one. And that means a lot more work in order to get this to be sharper and richer in space. When I was a kid, I had ideas of becoming an architect. And one of the things I did learn from my father was a certain amount of woodworking skills, because he liked to do that, and he had his own workshop in the basement and so forth. But I find it's a nice change from painting, and the birdhouses are I don't know, a way of coming to terms with the architecture, which I never did, and I mean in terms of real architecture, and a chance also to work woodwork, working with your hands, which I think is very satisfying. Yeah, this is one of the first. It was a little less elaborate when I did it. It didn't have the front porch. That came later.
So are you now happy with it? With the end, with the result?
I guess so. As far as I can tell. I like it all right, but I don't think it's strong enough to work larger as I want. I've always felt about technical things is anybody can learn those. It's what you do with them that counts. And I mean, you know, it's how you handle them, the personal quality that you give to it that really counts. And that's something that I wouldn't worry about having stolen. I mean, I don't think that's stealable.